Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a genuinely fascinating piece of political television. We're looking at a recent Sky News Australia broadcast that really dug into One Nation's historic win in the Farrer by-election. Now, whether you follow Australian politics closely or you're just curious about how populist movements suddenly gain traction, this analysis is going to give you a front row seat. We're talking the rhetoric, the strategy, and the intense media battles that absolutely define these pivotal moments. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's kick things off with one massive number that anchored this entire broadcast: 77. This isn't just a random statistic, folks. It represents the exact number of years that Farrer was held as a totally safe Liberal seat. We're talking over 7 decades of this electorate being an absolute stronghold. So when we talk about a massive electoral upset, you really have to keep that 77-year history in mind to grasp the sheer scale and the shockwave of One Nation actually taking this seat.
To make sense of all this, we're going to break the interview down into 4 quick parts: the historic win itself, the voter targeting strategy, the cultural and economic battleground, and finally, the media fallout.
Starting with part 1, a historic lower house win, breaking a 30-year barrier.
The broadcast traced Pauline Hanson's 30-year political journey, going all the way back to our initial House of Representatives election 3 decades ago. Now, in the interim, she's managed to win Senate seats, but she noted she faced constant political ridicule, with critics constantly saying she'd never win a lower house seat again. Well, today's victory in Farrer completely shatters that long-standing barrier. The broadcast framed it not just as a win, but as a long-awaited vindication for the party.
To really capture the energy of that vindication, the program showcased the newly elected member, David Farley. And he definitely didn't mince words. He used this striking metaphor, saying they're like a mason with a chisel and a hammer, recarving the letters into Australian democracy. Talk about vivid imagery, right? The hosts also pointed out the heavy symbolic weight of Farley now preparing to sit in Parliament right alongside the Nationals' Barnaby Joyce. That signals a major disruption to the traditional Conservative seating arrangement. All right, moving right along to part 2, targeting the disaffected voter and looking at the actual electoral math.
You know, the panel pinpointed the primary opening for One Nation by pointing directly to the recent Voice referendum, which, as we know, resulted in a 60% no vote. The hosts argued that the traditional Conservative parties, the Liberals and Nationals, essentially turned their backs on that massive 60% majority, acting quote-unquote all-teary, instead of representing them. One Nation saw this huge, unrepresented demographic and aggressively pursued them.
And here's where we see their really calculated dual-pronged strategy to capture these voters. On one side, it's a direct attack on the coalition for flip-flopping, trying to be too broad of a church and ultimately standing for nothing. But on the other side, they're actively moving to pull disaffected voters away from the Labour Party. The hosts argued that a lot of traditional Labour voters just don't recognize modern Labour anymore. They feel totally alienated by what the broadcast called woke obsessions, ideological craziness, and the politics of envy. It's a fascinating play to draw frustrated voters from both sides of the aisle into a brand new political home.
Okay, that brings us to part 3, the cultural and economic battle, rhetoric and policy. The broadcast really leaned hard into economic warnings here. Sky News host James framed the upcoming federal budget as a direct attack on aspiration. He pointedly compared Treasurer Jim Chalmers to, get this, Zoran Mati without a beard, using that to emphasize a perceived slide into what he forcefully called hard socialism. The argument they're making is that the major parties are actively punishing the everyday aspirations of voters, and that creates a huge void that populist platforms are just eager to fill. Since she was joining the broadcast on Mother's Day, the host enthusiastically introduced Pauline Hanson as Australia's happiest mom today. She then laid out her specific platform goals, claiming the major parties have, quote, run this country into the ground. To fix it, she listed her top priorities: bringing back prosperity, heavily boosting the agriculture and mining industries, providing hope for the youth, ensuring decent education, and entirely removing what she calls the woke agenda. To really hammer home that point about decent education and the woke agenda, Hanson cited ongoing cultural debates over gender terminology. Pointing to environments where you can't say male or female, she literally asked the hosts, what the hell has happened to our country? This is absolutely crucial because it highlights exactly how seamlessly the broadcast wove traditional economic concerns, like mining and farming, together with these highly charged cultural flashpoints to mobilize their base.
And finally, we hit part 4, responding to media critics and the populist pushback. To show you just how intense the friction is right now between this populist movement and the established press, the Sky News hosts actually presented this exact headline on air. It's from the 9 Papers, written by Peter Harcher, and it reads, "Australia teeters on the brink of a populist uprising led by a longtime racist." They read this to Hanson directly, showcasing the fierce, highly critical lens through which the established media is viewing this whole by-election result.
While Hanson certainly didn't hold back in her response to being called a racist, she completely dismissed the journalist as being in total denial, calling them bitter, bitter people. Interestingly, though, she countered the accusation by pointing straight to her support base. She asserted that she's surrounded by diverse migrants of different cultural backgrounds who explicitly tell her they support her agenda because they don't want Australia to become like the countries they originally left behind.
So the big takeaway here is One Nation's strategy of absolute defiance. They are entirely brushing aside the media aggression. Hanson explicitly stated that she is pushing that aggression to one side, ignoring the noise, and focusing purely on her supporters. She declared firmly that despite people saying they won't last, One Nation is, quote, here for the long haul.
Which brings us to one final, really crucial question. As the newly elected David Farley proudly claimed on election night, the party believes it has reached the end of its beginning. We've seen how they capitalize on a 77-year conservative stronghold completely falling, how they weaponize the 60% no vote, and how they are navigating this intense media scrutiny. But considering this deep rhetorical and cultural divide, what does this victory actually mean for the future of Australian politics? Are we just looking at an isolated protest vote, or is this the spark of a fundamental political realignment? Definitely something to chew on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.